Good time of day. This is Pinkerton, and I'd like to pose a question to you, the audience. Is a role playing game called a role playing game because the process of play encourages roleplay, or the end result of the rules is roleplay? The first option puts all of the weight of roleplay onto the players, assuming that they know what they're getting into coming in and will just naturally roleplay. However, the second option puts all of the weight onto the game designers and assumes the players will go in knowing it's a role playing game and the rules facilitate that roleplay rather than having to put all of the flavor up front. There is a secret third option, though, and that is being the ultimate worth decider of the hobby and just knowing it when you see it. This is the option that was taken by John Wick, no, not that one, in his 2013 article, Chess is Not an RPG, The Illusion of Game Balance. Link is in the description if you'd like to read it yourself. While researching for another video regarding how to incorporate more role-playing flavor into wargaming, I found this article and I'd like to shadowbox it today for your entertainment. Wick's core idea with the article is that a true role-playing game exists purely to help a group roleplay, hence the name role-playing game. And I think that we can generally agree this is a decent description. He argues that many so-called RPGs, however, have become too focused on mechanics and they're really just complex board games, with the two main culprits he wants to call out with this article being Dungeons & Dragons 1st through 4th edition, as well as World of Warcraft. His main argument hinges on two deeply interrelated points regarding this. One, if you can play a role-playing game without role-playing, it's not really a role-playing game. And two, if you can play a board game with role-playing, that doesn't necessarily make it a role-playing game. Based on this, he's saying that Dungeons & Dragons, again, 1st through 4th edition, rely so heavily on the group fighting monsters to get better loot, to fight bigger monsters, that it doesn't really reward the role-playing aspects and therefore can't be called a role-playing game. Whereas with World of Warcraft, the current culture of the game really pushes people towards optimizing mechanics rather than using the role-playing tools available. The title of the article references chess because he also mentions that if you added roleplay into chess, that wouldn't necessarily work out either because that might hamper your chances of winning the game. His ultimate conclusion is that as a GM, it's your job to remove any mechanics that get directly in the way with your players' role-playing and manage the spotlight effectively. If you can't quickly and effectively describe why a rule is important towards roleplay within 10 seconds, he directly says that you should just Sharpie the rule out of the game. Fundamentally, I agree with this main point, but the way he gets there I think is off, and I'd like to address point by point on why I think those points getting there is wrong. Point 0. What even is an RPG? Wick's definition of a role-playing game is a game that rewards players for making character-consistent choices or advancing the plot. My only real critique with this is there's no real explanation as to what a reward is, but I will assume moving forward, because John Wick is a game designer who has to target both a specific demographic as well as the widest margin possible within that demographic, not punishing roleplay or not reacting just completely neutrally to roleplay, but engaging with it. I've designed several games in the past, and in my opinion, rewarding roleplay is the evoked emotions you get from that roleplay, but we will be giving him the benefit of the doubt here. That being said, let's move forward into his other individual points. Point 1. The focus of a RPG is to tell stories, and with Wick, I'm in complete agreement on this one. It's even in the title, but I do want to focus on what the game part of a role-playing game is. In a game, there's set rules and confines that everyone agrees to ahead of time, which is pretty much the same exact thing as a social contract. And with the social contract, you're implicitly agreeing by your participation. For example, if a soccer player were to just pick up the ball with their hands and then chuck it, that isn't a federal crime. They're not going to have any real punishment for it, but within the confines of the game, it is a foul that requires justice. Using this idea, we can modify Wick's definition of an RPG to be a game where the social contract rewards players for making character-consistent choices or advancing the plot. Done poorly, this may just result in a glorified railroad, but most definitions of a tabletop game will, because most tabletop games are susceptible to this. One solution that I think works well is that if you have the mechanics inherently baked in to help roleplay, such as Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition backgrounds or Pathfinder's traits, then this can help circumvent because you naturally have those options available that you can mechanically use to circumvent these possible issues. That being said, the most important part is before playing a TTRPG, every player is agreed that they're going to be playing the game. They'll answer to their characters' names, they'll act in the best interest of their character or the most entertaining result of their character's actions, and group success is generally defined by how well everyone's able to do this. Point 2. Most games called RPGs are not. This is where I tend to part ways with Wick, as it relies on one load-bearing sentence. If you can successfully play a game without role-playing, it cannot be called a role-playing game. His main 3 examples he gives are Dungeons & Dragons, World of Warcraft, and chess. I'll now go through each of these individually and discuss. The second argument that Wick makes is that chess is a board game and not a role-playing game. This is true. It is a board game. But mainly, people tend to try and make board games into role-playing games, and then that forces them to play suboptimally and lose. Therefore, roleplay is not being a rewarded experience, and finally, that makes it not a role-playing game. This is the point that made me want to make this video in the first place, because there's one simple counter. Who cares? If people want to sit down and they determine that they're going to play Chess 2, where Chess 2, the only difference is that you're allowed to roleplay, not even that you have to, that you're allowed to. If everyone agrees, they have made that a role-playing game. The only difference between Dungeons & Dragons and improv with a fantasy flair to it is that people agree to all the extra rules involved. There's no reason you have to throw around the dice. They just do that because it's fun. They do that because they want to. And so, if you go into chess and you want to roleplay and everyone agrees that they want to roleplay, big news, it's a role-playing game. Maybe you want to come from the argument that instead of this, it's actually authorial intent that determines this, and this is exactly what Wick does. Quote, if you try playing games such as Vampire or Pendragon or Our Last Best Hope or World of Dew or Deadlands without role-playing, you're missing the entire point of the game. In fact, I can't even imagine what those games would look like without role-playing. So clearly authorial intent is important to this definition, except clearly it isn't, because otherwise World of Warcraft would be a role-playing game, and Dungeons & Dragons would be a role-playing game. If it's up to the author and the game designers to determine what is and isn't, what is stopping me from myself, instead of those players from before, making Chess 2, just writing in the front of the rule pamphlet, this is a role-playing game, and making it a role-playing game? These are two completely contrary ideas that you're trying to present within the same paragraph, and I fundamentally don't understand how that's even possible. My only real conclusion from this is that John Wick is the ultimate decider of worth when it comes to role-playing games. And John, you're getting kind of up there in age. I really hope you've chosen an heir. I mean, I'll take the position, but I feel like most people aren't going to agree with my opinions. I have some pretty terrible opinions, and that's why I started a YouTube channel. World of Warcraft. Wick's argument about how World of Warcraft isn't a role-playing game is derived from the main point that the players care much more about optimization than roleplay and aren't using their role-playing tools. This ties into the argument that if a game can be played without roleplay, it's not a role-playing game. There are 2 main points I want to bring up about this. One, he focuses on the part of the community that really cares about optimization more than anything else. If you'd like to learn more about this, I recommend the Folding Ideas video on the subject, link in the description. What it doesn't account for is also the sub-communities of the game that care way more about roleplay and actively make their own servers about it. Those players are interacting with this as a role-playing game, and both groups have access to all the same tools. The only real difference here is what buttons you're pushing. Secondly, there's the issue with those tools existing in the first place. Later arguments are going to get into how authorial intent is important, and this assumes that the game developers have also given up the ghost and just don't care. However, if they didn't care, then they wouldn't have kept the tools in the game for these people who want to roleplay. If they really were saying, you know what, this is all just chaff, we don't need it for the game anymore, they'd remove it to make room for more things. But no, they designed it from the ground up to be an MMO, RPG, and it's still designed that way. And if they do still care about it being a role playing game, then that just completely nullifies the group who don't want to play with it that way. They're their own little sub-community working on their own social contract. They don't really apply to this conversation in the first place. It's like trying to develop a video game around the speedrunners of the community instead of the whole community. It's just a weak argument overall. The third game mentioned as not being a role-playing game is Dungeons & Dragons, and honestly I think this was just done for clickbait. Wick says that D&D isn't a role-playing game because it primarily rewards combat, the main gameplay loop being kill monsters to get better loot to kill bigger monsters. While D&D is extremely combat heavy, I'd like you to imagine a scenario where a player has been asked to play D&D with a friend group. We can map out 4 scenarios that would occur under Wick's argued framework. 1. You are there and everyone agrees to both play a game and roleplay. This is a role-playing game. Simple as. 2. Everyone agrees to roleplay but not to play a game. This is just improv night at the comedy club. If I showed up to this, I'd say, hey guys, I made this character. They have all their mechanics and I want to play this specific character. We aren't playing a role-playing game right now. 3. We all show up and we all play the mechanics of the characters but not the actual character. This is just board game night. I'd agree that this isn't a role-playing game because it's like, man, I made all my characters specifically with these mechanics and I want to use that to flavor my character and go into their backstory and tell a rewarding story. So I'd agree that's not a game, or that's not a role-playing game. And finally, if no one's role-playing and no one's playing a game, then that's just buds hanging out. Like, that's fine, I guess, but if you invite me to play a role-playing game and we aren't doing anything, I'm just stealing something from your house, man. But all of these are predicated on the same idea. Someone approached me wanting to play a role-playing game. I said yes. We all agreed to sit around the table, and then the social contract was changed out from under me. I agreed to play a role-playing game. So if someone comes up to me and says, hey, would you like to play Dungeons & Dragons, the role-playing game? It's on the cover of the book. I'm going to assume they want to play that first one, a role-playing game. Is it possible to do it the other ways? Yes, but that goes against the game design. That goes against the social understanding. That goes against most ideas of how to play the game. Yes, I can take a shower and replace the water with hydrochloric acid, but that's not going to be a very good shower. And if you're saying, well, because you can do that, you can't even call that a shower to begin with, again, you're wrong, and I'm going to be stealing something from your house this time. Like, if we want to get into semantics of it, and with the authorial intent argument you were making earlier, a role-playing game has been on the cover of most of these books except for the 3rd edition book, which opens with the paragraph, "This is the Dungeons & Dragons role-playing game, the game that defines the genre and sets the standard of fantasy role-playing for more than 30 years. I don't want to put the cart before the horse and say that because it's the first it gets to decide what everything is, but because there's been these 30 years of people saying this is the role-playing game, that's where it gets its weight from. Which means that the players decide what a role-playing game is or is not. You've fallen into the same pattern again of either the author and the game designers get to decide or the players decide, but not both. And either way, you're wrong. Either way, it just completely goes against the point you're trying to make. So really, any game can be an RPG, no matter how bad it is, because either the authors decide or the players decide. In my personal opinion, it's the players that decide, But either way, the only differentiator between a role-playing game, a board game, improv night, or just blokes fucking around is that everyone agrees they're playing a role-playing game. Point 3. Most RPGs are too focused on their mechanics over roleplay. Now, given all of those arguments in the past, now we can get into the meat and potatoes of the other half of the problem. Because if roleplay isn't the main issue we're dealing with, at least we can look at the gameplay elements, because the gameplay should be furthering the roleplay. As Wick states, if you can play a role-playing game without roleplay, then it shouldn't be a role-playing game. This is where Wick says that if you can't directly tie a game mechanic to a specific act that allows you to roleplay, you should just sharpie out. More specifically, quote, because if the most important part of your game is balancing damage, rate of fire, range modifiers, damage dice, ablative armor, dodge modifiers, or speed factors, you aren't playing a role-playing game, you're playing a board game. While I do agree with the sentiment that the most important part of the role-playing game should be your players, the mechanics of a game should help to inform the roleplay. Let's take a scenario where the GM tells you encounter two bandits. One has a keen elven dagger and the other a double war axe. You probably imagine two very different people, even though the same amount of information was given in both. In theory, there's no reason why you can't imagine the two separate people, but I'd call you a liar if you said that you did imagine the same guy with both. The individual mechanics are designed to fit the flavor of the setting, and are designed, in turn, to enhance the roleplay. If they don't, then you just have a bad game overall. The main example that came to mind when first reading this was the Pathfinder feat system. Like, yes, you can look at Lunge and read that it doesn't do anything to particularly add to roleplay. But one, if you're good at roleplaying, you can 100% do that, either with it being that you're so skilled that you know how to move forward and can calculate the risk in your mind, or two, that you're so willing to take those risks that it doesn't even matter that you are taking them. And B, while you can argue that Lunge doesn't really help, you cannot argue to me that feats don't help, because feats taken as a whole are what help define your character mechanically and make them unique. That's why every Pathfinder character can feel different even if you're playing with similar archetypes. It's up to the GM to take that and, within their own game design and planning, really heighten those elements. It's group cooperation to play the game to reward role-playing. It's a social contract. And at what point does someone even get to decide whether something's distracting or not? What if I decide that the randomness of dice is too distracting from roleplay because someone may want to do something and they can't because they can't roll well? Well, yes, you can remove the dice, but what happens whenever stats get in the way? Because maybe you want your tiny guy in a wheelchair to suddenly be invigorated with magic, stand up, and clobber the big monster. Well, with stats, that might be impossible, so you should just write that way too. Overall, I had a long list of examples to give here and why it's important, but the point just stands for itself. If the players are role-playing and having fun, and they decide that the game mechanics help them roleplay, it's a role-playing game. And they probably chose the system they're playing because they like how those mechanics lead directly into the roleplay. The core point: a GM's job is to maximize player storytelling. Overall, we're left with two key facts. One, for Wick's arguments on what a role-playing game is, to be consistent, players and GMs are always the people who decide what is and isn't a role-playing game, but only one of them can be. And two, for Wick's views on what a role-playing game isn't, to be consistent, a role-playing game is either improv structured with as little as humanly possible, or whatever the players and GMs feel a role-playing game is. Either way, Wick's overall support for his real argument that games are over-engineered completely falls apart because he can't get to the real meat and potatoes of what he actually wants to say. Don't forget, all of this is just supporting arguments towards the main point. As a GM, your job is to help players tell their character stories, and that game balance has nothing to do with telling good stories. Here's the kicker: I completely agree. I'm not even being ironic here. I sound annoyed because I am, and that's just because it's baffling how we got to this point in the first place. Imagine you're presented with a perfect tiramisu. You take a bite, it's like very creamy, it tastes good, and then you find out that it was made with mayonnaise and Ritz crackers. When I first read this article, the gut reaction was just you had no clue what you're talking about. And now at the end of it, I can tell that you do have a nugget at the very end, but like, did you just have some really Gygaxian players who were getting on your nerve that day? Were you just trying to shoehorn two separate points and you didn't really know how to spread it out? Like, you can make two blog posts, man. It's not that hard to do. Like, overall, whenever players are given no tools and no rewards, players will still seek out roleplay as a hobby, because the act of roleplay and feeling those emotions is a reward in and of itself. This is why we've had plays and acting forever. This is why role playing games were invented to begin with. It's not XP or fat loot that the people want, they want to feel things. TLDR. Wick presents the argument that most games calling themselves role playing games are instead very intricate board games that rely too heavily on crunchy mechanics and in turn lose their core identity. However, this argument misses an entire forest for a single shrub. Players want to roleplay, that's why they're playing a role playing game. If they've chosen a system that they want to play that's more crunchy, it's because they feel that those crunchy mechanics help in their role play. And if they didn't want to play a role playing game, they just play chess. If they did want to play a role playing game and all they had is a chessboard, they'd find a way to make it D&D. Either the game designers get to decide what a role playing game is, the players get to decide what it is, or both. Given Wick's arguments, the only person here who really doesn't get to have any discussion on what a role playing game is Wick himself. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. Thank you.